Now, we are going to discuss the issue of preparing the standing orders for the digital era. I have the absolute pleasure to welcome three great references in this subject. The first one is the former member of the US House of Representatives, Baird. We have the representative from the Argentinian Congress, Dios, Cincunegui. I apologize if I misspell it. And the former Secretary General of the Board of the Brazilian Senate House, Luís Fernando Bandeira de Mello. Thank you all of you for joining us in this discussion. It's an absolutely honor to be the moderator in this discussion today with you about a topic I know you very passionately are studying, and you are also practitioners on this realm of knowledge. And I would like to share a little bit of the rules of our engagement here today. I will bring 3 rounds of questions, and I will direct each one of these questions for one of you, and all the others will have the ability to comment after that. So let me start with our first round. The topic of our discussion here today is focused on preparing Parliament's standing orders to the digital era. During the entire conference, we discussed outstanding tools that provided the means for Parliament institutions and MPs to better perform their job and maintain the checks and balances in an ever-growing digital executive branch. We understand Parliament safeguard the ethical values of our societies, interpreted through the lens of a particular time in history. It means the decision-making process should be guided by a non-zero-sum game based on democratic values with means for accountability by the society. But maybe the means to achieve has changed in the past few decades. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this, Bandeira, on how the standing orders in the legislative can be updated to reflect the social dynamics of the time. In a sense, it enables the usage of information and communication technology. Bandeira, you have 5 minutes to answer this question.
Okay, Luís, Kimaid, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. I'd like to also to compliment my 2 colleagues in this panel, Mr. Baird and Mr. Juan de Dios Cincunegui. Well, I hope my English would be good enough to understand. Well, I think the theme of our discussion today is very, very interesting, because the way we do Parliament all over the world is not very different from the way the Greeks did 3,000 years ago. Some 50 or 100 or 200 people gather together, and they will vote for the rules of the society. And the way they vote is what the standing rules is all about. The standing rules of a parliament will exactly will try to preview the situations, the possible situations of voting, and will try to deal and address them. The last big revolution that we had in the way the parliaments work were around 30 years ago, when the sessions began to be transmitted by TV. And in this moment, the parliament changed very much, because in this moment, the people could watch their MEP working, and we had a huge changing in transparency in society control, and this made forced changing in the standing rules, because the time of speech had to be reduced, and also the way the MP will talk, will debate, had changed also. Now, I guess our main concern when we talk about standing rules is about the remote vote. After the pandemics, almost every parliament in the world have adopted some kind of remote voting, maybe by telephone, maybe by internet, or any kind of a system that each parliament would adopt. And this changing has a big deal with the way the parliament will function. Why? Because the number of MPs who are present to vote a bill is fundamental to the way minority will work. For example, minority will always, in general, minority will always lose a vote because they are minority. So one of their instruments to deal with the reduced number of MPs is due of time, is try to use the speech, try to get time enough to sometimes change the balance of the two forces, and sometimes the majority won't have enough votes to pass a bill. But when we go to remote vote, this kind of artifice is very much difficult, because MPs may vote from their homes, and automatically you have a superpower from the majority, and this may cause a certain type of malfunction of parliament. I remember, for example, that in Canada, they are used to close the doors when they start to vote a bill. They close the doors exactly to prevail to that somebody comes in just for voting. In Brazil, I've been for 7 years the Secretary General of the Brazilian Senate, the clerk of Brazilian Senate, and we don't do this, but we saw it was very frequent to see MPs come to the session uniquely to vote, to exercise the right to vote. But when we come to remote vote, it's a whole new deal, and we should see each parliament decide if they will continue with the remote voting after the pandemics, or if they will come back to the traditional system of the citizens, senators, and MPs gathering together in a session to discuss and vote. And I guess this is the new borderline, the new frontier, if you want, to when you discuss standing rules from Parliament. I know I have only 5 minutes. I don't want to exaggerate, so I will leave some considerations for my next participation. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Bandeira. At the end of this round, after the comments of Congressman Brian Baird and Dios, you have plus 5 minutes to finalize the round. Congressman Brian Baird, would you like to comment on what I proposed as a question and on what Bandeira just mentioned? I would add, if you allow me, a provocation here based on the Bandeira's considerations, that do you believe this effort for the continuity may impact, for example, the discussion about the filibuster in the US? So maybe you can answer this question, adding these comments about the filibuster as well would be very interesting.
Sure. Well, let me start, first of all, by thanking you, Luis, and all the colleagues here. It was great to meet you, gentlemen, remotely, and I've really enjoyed the other speakers who preceded in this marvelous and very timely and transformational conference you've put together. Very informative. A little background, my interest in this issue goes back actually to the attacks of September 11th, when quite literally, as I was helping lead the evacuation of my office building, not knowing if I would be killed or not, because I had literally just seen the explosion at the Pentagon from my window. I began, even as I was evacuating people, to say, what happens if you kill large numbers of us? What happens if the Capitol is destroyed? How do we meet? How do you have a quorum? How do we have votes? And that began what's now been a more than 2 decades effort. And of course, at the time, we had some rudimentary level of teleconference, but nothing in place in our government. So here are a few lessons that I've learned that the way I see the situation today. First, appropriate to this topic, it is absolutely essential that the standing rules be put in place to allow Congresses to meet remotely, because if those standing rules aren't in place, how can the Congress meet in a time of catastrophe to put them in place? That's not actually abstract at all. In our country, in the COVID situation, COVID came in and it was recognized that there would be dangers to reconvening, but the rules were not in place to allow any non-in-person meeting or votes or hearings. So how do you convene to pass rules when it's unsafe to convene? So you have to look ahead to the circumstances you may face and put standing rules in place for should those circumstances arise. Secondly, I think it's important to look at some criteria that we should measure our situation against our rules. And that includes the current rules. As your prior panel pointed out, people are resistant to change and they tend to assume they don't want the status quo to be any different. Well, terrorist attacks, pandemics, mob assaults, assassinations change the rules or change the situation, and your rules have to be flexible. So here are some principles. One, you must be able to ensure that the government can meet in a time of national crisis and the constitutional checks and balances are maintained. Two, you must make sure that the representation is continued for everybody, not just if you've got some subset of people who are harmed or incapacitated or prevented from joining, you can't let their constituents not have a voice. So you have to make sure representation is continued. Three, you should make sure that the political balance from the election is not altered by catastrophic events or assassinations. In our United States Senate today, I hate to say this, but it is true, a single assassination could not only kill a public servant, but could change the entire power structure of the US Senate, thereby reinforcing the intention to assassinate. The reason that is because if in many of our states, if say a Democrat is assassinated, the Republican governor could appoint a Republican replacement. That's almost an incentive to assassination. So we need to have replacements possible that don't already alter the political balance. Now, and it has to be fast and it has to be temporary if there's to be such replacements. Now, in terms of remote Congress, there's sort of 3 scenarios that we have to deal with, and the rules should accommodate these. One, a catastrophic event in which no one can convene safely. That could be a pandemic, it could be a credible nuclear threat, it could be mob violence. You have to have a way to deal with that so that you can remotely meet and vote. The second scenario is not a general catastrophe, it's the personal tragedies. I had to leave my congressional duties to be with my father as he died. Well, I had postponed going to be with him because I had congressional responsibilities, and I only was able to spend 1 day with him before he died. I wish I could have voted remotely so that I could have been with my family in a time of need. Similarly, if I'm gravely ill, if my spouse is pregnant, or if I'm a female member and I'm pregnant, my constituents' rights to be represented should not be impacted by that. Now, the third scenario we have to watch out for, and that is, would we let it to be just standard practice that we would meet remotely? I think that is a mistake, but the rules should allow for the other 2 conditions. And I'll pause at this point to hear from my colleagues, and I'm again delighted to be with you today.
Thank you, Congressman Brian Baird. Juan and Dios, be most welcome to our discussion here today. Would you like to make a comment on what the colleagues just mentioned to us? I would highlight something that the Congressman mentioned here. Are civil servants and members concerned about change? How do you see yourself as a civil servant in the Argentinian Congress, and how do you see your colleagues when this discussion about modernization requires the House to rethink the standing orders? And how do you believe colleagues are seeing that today? If you may add this to your answer as well.
Hello, Luis. Thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations on the organization of this second Legislature for Democracy conference. Hello, Luis Fernando. Good to see you again. And hi, Brian. Nice to meet you remotely. Happy Democracy Day, everyone. It is a true honor for me to be part of this formidable network to promote the digital transformation of our parliament. I want to start by adding some basic ideas to the excellent reflections of my colleagues. I think both were very practical. I would like to start saying that asking ourselves, what are the standing orders and how important are they for parliaments? Surely everyone agrees to consider the standing orders the most important piece of rules of the game of politics in the parliamentary arena. Luis Fernando said something about that, mentioned even in Greece 300 years ago. As Jorge Gentile wrote in a book titled Parliamentary Law, published almost 2 decades ago, and I quote, "In a parliament, defenders of the government coexist with those who aspire to succeed them. That is the opposition, and both fulfilling a dialectical role of permanent confrontation and consultation." So the ruling party, which is generally the majority in the assembly, defines the government's orientation. And the opposition, which is usually a minority, controls the government's action by resisting some of its acts, permanently forcing it to give reasons for its policy, always supporting implicitly or tacitly the advantages of its alternate proposal. So to this, the quoted author adds, Parliament is also a sounding board for public opinion, not only as the controller of the government, but also any circumstance that moves the very sensitive public opinion of a free society has its manifestation in the assemblies. That due to the way in which their members are elected, because of the permanent contact that they maintain with their electors, and because of the political character that they par excellence have, they must manifest within them the spams that occur within the societies they represent. Hans Kelsen said that parliamentarism meant the formation of the decisive will of the state through a collegiate body elected by the people by virtue of a general and equal suffrage right that is democratic, acting on the basis of the majority principle. Well, an Argentine academic, Jorge Vanosi, when speaking of representativeness, quotes Lowenstein, who affirms that the technique of representation was the prerequisite and indispensable condition for distributing political power among different holders of that power. Gentile points out that also within the modern parliaments, the role of mediation and consultation between the parliamentary blocks or groups representing parties or party coalitions has gained a great importance. In this area, many of the disputes that arise in society are negotiated and finished processing, especially when none of the parties or coalitions has its own majority to decide. And finally, as the word parliament indicates, speaking, dialogue, or debate plays a fundamental role in the decision-making process of legislative bodies. So the standing orders constitute the regulatory framework for these complex and important activities that I have just described. It is nothing more and nothing less than the rules of democracy, a system that supposedly aims to keep us free and provide us equal opportunities and treatment. As you all know, in addition to the rights and regulations, there are other rules equally valid created by custom and tradition, a very common source of law in parliaments, which makes the issue even more difficult to address, since the creation of these norms, writing or oral, in fact or in law, are generally built after many, many years, decades, and even centuries. So it is clear that the standing orders are a very sensitive matter. By this, I do not mean that they should not be revised or adapted to the digital age. Quite the opposite. I absolutely agree on the need to modernize parliaments for various reasons, but mainly because it constitutes an imperative, an obligation, a necessity, but also it is the best way to empower them. And I am absolutely agree with all the consideration of my colleagues here. I think, again, it was very practical because of a question like emergencies, because we need to assure the continuity of the functioning of parliaments, because it's something that it's already working. I mean, the remote functioning is everywhere. No, it's something that the society is doing, and it has been doing it for a long time. So, well, we can talk later about what are we doing in Argentina, and to share experiences, concrete experiences with you. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Juan. Bandeira, I'd like to go back with you, but before I do, from what I get from Juan, a contribution with us right now, is basically we're talking about customs and traditions that are defining how we are discussing the issues we have in our societies. And I cannot stop to think that we are discussing thousands of years of social evolution in a institution that you can go back as far as the Roman Republic, and it has been evolving since then. But you are trying to read this 1,000-year-old institution through the lens of modern technology. So I can see why we're having difficulties here. We are trying to merge three different dimensions that are completely apart from each other, and one view that ensures democracy, ensures the right of the minority, as you mentioned, but governed by the will of the majority. So please feel free to close this round for more 5 minutes on what the colleagues just shared.
Okay, thank you, Luis. I would say, first of all, yes, the weight of tradition in a parliament is giant, is enormous. And when we look at the European parliaments, the traditions is even heavier. We can see this when we had the problem, when just started the problem of COVID. We had a lot of parliaments that were locked down. They couldn't work because they didn't have the standing rules that Congressman Baird signed, that we need some standing rules that would allow the MPs, the members of parliament, to get together, and even if they cannot do this in person, that they do this remotely. We changed in Brazil, we changed the standing rules in the first days of pandemics of COVID, and we say that the remote system would be used only exclusively in situations of war, social convulsion, public calamity, pandemics, emergency, epidemiological emergency, collapse of the system, transport systems, or situations that impeach the meeting in person of the senators. This was the provision that we added to the standing rules. But the question is, what to do this later? What to do with this whole remote system after the pandemics? We would continue to serve as a way to vote. I guess the remote system for video conferencing and all this is very interesting for hearings, for example. We can even make some economy. Instead of bringing someone from another country to talk to senators, we can make a video conference in a public hearing by video conference. But I guess when we talk to the rights of a minority of the opposition, like Juan de Dios have remembered, the filibustering is highly in prejudice, is highly difficult in function of the remote voting. And this is a question, a relevant question, in the way that you have to give some instruments, some parliamentary instruments to the minority to express and to try to fight against the majority, the government in general. I would add a last comment, Luis, if you allow me, only to say that also a point that should be object of reflection in matter of standing orders is how to bring in the legislative process the opinion of citizens, the opinion that the people can share in the websites of parliaments. We have almost all parliaments of the world have some kind of tool that the citizens may share some opinion on the bills, and we don't have. I haven't seen, nor in Brazil nor in other countries, a way that this opinion of the citizens can be brought into the legislative process in order to be considered by members of parliament. I guess also this is with the digital revolution, the digital era is a point of concern that we should think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Bandeira. Thank you for your considerations. We move to the next round now. I kindly ask that if you could keep your answers a little bit short, because I'm assuming we will not have enough time. So I kindly ask that our answers to have 3 minutes. And now I'd like to move to our second round. The digital transformation in the legislative is based on what the technology could enable parliaments to do, and the requirements of the standing orders on how the legislative process will proceed. And countless times, even before the pandemic, we see sophisticated digital solutions designed for the problems of the legislative that could enable civil servants, parliamentary staff, and MPs to perform their job better, but its implementation is not in compliance with the standing orders. My question to you, beginning with you, Juan, what are the biggest challenges to enable in the standing orders these digital solutions that could provide better means to exercise legislative activities?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Luis. First of all, I think it is important to clarify that, as we say in Argentina, we have to put the horse in front of the cart and not the other way around, the cart in front of the horse, for things to work. The key must be in the modernization process, the values that inspire it, its objectives and goals. The solutions derived from technological innovation must be adapted to this process and not the other way around. So do we really want more transparent, participatory, efficient, and effective parliaments? Because that's what it's all about, political will. If that is what we want, the logical thing is to apply the best rules of art available and progressively incorporate state-of-the-art technology. Ultimately, what matters are values and a sincere vocation. Technologies are a means and not an end in itself. So the same goes for standing orders, their texts, the interpretation of those texts, the handwriting rules, and in general, their implementation, as well as the periodicity of their revision, will depend on the values shared by political actors, on the ecosystem built over the years, on the culture and the idiosyncrasies of each country, state, or city. It is extremely interesting what happened to parliaments around the world with the outbreak of the pandemic. Truly amazing, and a very clear example of what I'm saying. In 2003, I organized a video call between the government of the province of Italy and the province of Buenos Aires. At that time, I was working for the chief of staff of the local state government. To organize it, we had to ask the telephone company for help. In 2015, more than a decade later, the new speaker of the Argentine Chamber of Deputies appointed me responsible for parliamentary diplomacy and international cooperation. So the first thing I did as soon as I assumed was to ask our IT office to assist me in organizing virtual meetings with our embassies and diplomatic representations abroad, and with parliaments and parliamentarians all around the world. It was not planned, so I started using Skype. Incredible. So the IT office only warranted internet connection and provided screens to the number of participants on our side. So of course, many parliaments already used in that time more sophisticated system to hold remote meetings. So what do I mean by this? That the technology already existed, that it was already in force and in use. I am often surprised by the level of importance we assign to the adaptation of parliaments to their remote mode. Sure, there were a lot of challenges, but the technology already existed. The only thing that happened was that it was perfected. So the relevant fact is why most of the world's parliaments had not experienced enough. So let us think that along with parliaments, the educational system had to adapt from primary to secondary school up to the university, and the same thing happened both with individuals and organizations of all kinds, including companies, clubs, and organizations of all type, of course. So the biggest challenge was political and cultural. In the case of Argentina, our case is very curious. Although we have a bicameral system, on August 27, 1986, the lower house created a special commission on the modernization of parliamentary functioning. The Senate lacks a similar commission. Historically, its performance, I'm talking about the commission, was not very relevant, having been considered a commission of little or no importance. So as 2014, it was not even constituted. So the commission was inactive until 2020, which returned to work motivated by the appearance of the pandemic. So I do believe that the work carried out by the commission to adapt the functioning of the lower house remotely or telematically has been very relevant, efficient, and effective. Its greatest milestone has been the approval of the protocol on May 13, 2020. We didn't modify the standing orders. We created protocols for the emergency. Another much more important parliamentary advisory commission has historically been the Commission on Powers, Petitions and Regulations, permanent and extremely powerful. It has the competence to rule on any petition or particular matter presented to the chamber, as well as to understand reforms and interpretation of the standing rules, elections of deputies, organization and functioning of the secretariat. So the standing orders of the Argentine Chamber of Deputies were modified the last time on December of 2019. The last wasn't a modification or reform of the standing rules. It was the creation of an emergency protocol. I can assure you that the statutes of the Interparliamentary Union register more revisions than ours. The difference is that the IPU has 179 member parliament, as you know, and we have only 23 states or provinces and the autonomous city of Buenos Aires. So, but let's be optimistic. Sooner or later, the people themselves, the voter, demand change, and institutions that do not adapt to change end up paying a high cost. So people end up voting for those who understand their claims, who listen to their voice. Digital parliaments, like government and justice, will end up adapting to the new digital age. So the challenge is how fast and deeply they will do it. In my opinion, what we are talking here about is not just about the parliament. We are talking about the future of politics. So that's a big challenge.
Thank you, Juan, for your consideration. Congressman Brian Baird, would you like to comment for 3 minutes on what Juan just shared with us?
Well, I think both Luis and Juan raised a number of really insightful observations, and the first being about the very positive potential of remote interactions and the fact that we can now bring witnesses to hearings from far away. We had a mock hearing to show our Congress that this was possible. I helped lead an effort with former members of Congress, and we were able to demonstrate the power of the technology. We had former General David Petraeus testify remotely. We had a member of the Spanish Parliament testify remotely. We had a representative of the UK government testify remotely. It was basically flawless. So that advantage is powerful. Luis, you mentioned the ability to engage the citizens. we've had some interesting experience with that in the House Resources Committee led by Raul Grijalva, where they've actually posted bills online, allowed the public to offer input and comment and even suggest edits to the legislation. Now, some members of Congress get very upset about that, but it's very inclusive and involved in an interesting experience. I think it's important to note that the opposition seemed to come to technology from a combination of factors. One, the power of tradition, which my colleagues have accurately described. Two, however, was personal fear on the part of particularly older members of Congress that they couldn't handle the technology, that they would be embarrassed publicly if there were a computer glitch. And there were examples of that, with a member of Congress thinking he was off the air and swearing, someone else walking around not necessarily in proper attire. But we can solve that. We can provide technological support and training. But on this concept of the rules, I think one of the things we have to watch out for, and I don't have a solution for this, both Luis and Juan talked about protecting the minority rights. If the chair of a committee can just silence you with the click of a button, how does the minority get protected? The other side of that, we learned, I think one of the changes that happened in the US Congress, and I'll finish with this brief comment, was once the television of the proceedings, televised live proceedings happened, the quality of debate declined. People stopped talking to each other and trying to find solutions and began trying to make points on television. And so instead of real discussion, dialogue, debate, and problem solving, you had publicized posturing, prepared remarks, everyone trying to get that next soundbite. And now we see that as the next meme on the internet. So how we can strengthen inclusion and public participation, but watch out for the danger of demagoguery amplified by technology, I think is one of the challenges we face.
Thank you, Congressman Brian Baird. Bandeira, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I guess we the three of us have the same view of the problem. We have a basically question of a political will, like Juan de Dios have said, because we already had the possibility of making a public hearing by video conference. The technology to do this, we had already. Juan de Dios mentioned that they had a committee that was created in 2014, and we needed a pandemic to begin to convene to effectively work. And Congressman Brian Baird say a real truth. I have the same feeling that when we go to television, when we did 30 years ago, the movement of congressmen in television, everybody starts to speak to the TV. Today, people want to make a 3-minute video, 5-minute video to make it in the social media and have likes. And sometimes you have this technological evolution, but you don't have political evolution in the way, in the sense of discussion, of better bill discussion. Well, what I would like to say is that when you have the political will to use the tools of technology to make a better parliament, so you have the ways to do this. Mr. Brian Baird, remember that we have the same problem in Brazil when we get the suggestions and the opinions of the citizens about a bill. So in general, they are against the bill, and the senators and the congressmen begin to, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. maybe it's such an overdose of democracy. And the technology must work as a tool for the parliament to work better, and it's not the inverse. And I guess we are evolving. This is a continual process, and we have seen a lot of evolution in this period of pandemics.
Thank you, Bandeira, for your comments. Juan de Dios, would you like to close this round with your comments for 3 minutes?
Something very simple. I think that the digital transformation of Parliament has no limits, really. Like Brian and Luis Fernando said, there are plenty of opportunities. The potential is really incredible. And I think that for the benefit of our parliaments, but of course of our democracies and countries and citizens, if we are prepared for the changes that we are living, I think that the countries that are ahead will be the more beneficiaries of all this process. So as I said, in my opinion, it's an imperative. So if we have good politicians and good parliamentarians, they must be working on this transformation as soon as possible. So the message, in my opinion, and according to what my colleague said, is this is key. This is key for the present, but in particular for the future of our nations.
Thank you, Juan de Dios, for your last comment. I'd like to move to our last round of questions here today. I feel that we could stay the whole day discussing this, but we are sadly moving to our last question. During the beginning of the pandemic of COVID-19, Parliament had to react rapidly to the health emergency to implement remote capabilities and ensure parliamentary continuity. As Bandeira mentioned at the beginning, many legislatures, such as the Senate in Brazil, regulated it in either the temporary acts or amending the standing orders to suit that specific moment. We are well aware that the possibility of remote capabilities ensure, as Brian was sharing with us, institutional resiliency in many other situations, such as a terrorist attack or an armed conflict or another pandemic. So having a resilient legislative institution provides more security for the democratic system. In a sense, it brings an extra layer of redundancy for Parliament. And that's the word I have been hearing during the conference, redundancy. I was discussing with the colleague from the NATO Cybersecurity Center yesterday in the conference, and she said, okay, in the digital realm, you have new threats, so you have to have redundancies. So I'm assuming the same logic here. So we need to have redundancies to the democratic processes, in a sense that we think as the legislative power much more than in a historical building, but as a democratic value. So in case we cannot convene in the institution, in the premises, we can convene, as Congressman Baird was mentioning, remotely. Please feel free to comment on that, Brian. I feel that that's a topic that you are passionately advocating in the US for the last 20 years.
Well, thank you, Luis. And I think my colleagues have been so articulate and precise about both why the benefits we have of the technology, the challenges of adapting our rules, and also where some of the resistance has come from. I think we have to have in place a mechanism whereby if we believe that checks and balances are important, if we believe that we need a legislative branch in addition to and as a check on the executive branch, then we've got to find a way for the legislative branch to function as it's supposed to, even and especially in the most grave times. And that involves, in my mind, both a technological solution with rules that allow it to work, and then some mechanism by which we can replace rapidly and in a constitutionally valid and politically consistent fashion members if they are in some ways incapacitated or deceased. So it's that combination. The importance of this, I believe, is it sends a powerful message to our adversaries, both internal or external. The idea being you could invade the capital of the United States if you want, and people tried on January 6th. You could attack us with jets as they did on September 11th. You could even drop a nuclear weapon on us, but we will have a mechanism in place for rapidly, constitutionally replacing our elected representatives with similarly capable, similarly minded people, at least temporarily, till elections can be held, and they can meet on the very next day, thanks to technology. Imagine a nuclear attack on the United States Capitol. If we had a mechanism whereby maybe I'm in office and I'm dead, but a person who thinks like me with similar values, similar capabilities can replace me, and then he or she does not have to travel across the country to the burning Capitol. They can log in remotely and they can have representation, and the government can continue in its constitutional structure the day after a decapacitating attack. And that is incredibly powerful, a symbol of our democracy and our republics.
Thank you, Brian, for your considerations. Juan de Dios, would you like to comment on what Brian just shared with us?
Yes, of course, I agree 100% with Brian. It's even a question of national security. I can define the issue in this way. Well, no, I want to talk about what is going to happen, what should happen post-pandemic, and I think that I'm sure at least in hybrid form, the remote system is here to stay. I'm sure that everybody agrees. It would be sincerely absurd for its use to be banned after the pandemic. So, of course, Congress will have to grapple with the preferences of all legislators. Some prefer to work in person, others telematically, and others in both directions. There is an interesting article I want to mention, published last June by Mark Thompson of the University of Oxford, entitled Hybrid Work, What Does It Mean for the Future of Work, which cites a recent survey by Accenture, according to which 80% of financial services leaders want people to return to work in person at their offices. And at the same time, a labor force survey in the UK found that 88% of employees who work at home during the pandemic do not want to go back to face-to-face mode. So Thompson, this person, wonders if hybrid work has a future. His response is positive. About 88% of employees value some form of work from home, and more than 50% wants to retain this post-pandemic modality. And service from the employer side also shows enthusiasm from the point of view of reducing, of course, cost, physical space, increasing productivity, and reducing the level of sick leave. So the challenge is to come up with a combination that works. Finally, I would like to, basically, I think that's the key point with regard to the fact that the regulations would have to be changed to allow the full development of new technologies in the parliamentary sphere. And my answer is whenever necessary, by adjusting to the values, objectives, and goals desired by the parliamentary community, the standing orders must adapt to the new rules of the game, articulating with new technologies, periodically adjusting to new solutions through constant innovation. But of course, in the case of the United States, it's even more imperative than countries like Argentina that are in different global situation. No, for the US, I think it's imperative. But you are very practical, so you will do it for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan de Dios. Bandeira, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Luis, thank you. When you talked about the parliaments that have to move fast in the beginning of the pandemic, I just thought about the Senate, Brazilian Senate bunker. We created a bunker. If I can show a really fast photo. Do you see this photo that I show now? Just we see the president of the Senate is right in front of a big screen, 1455 inches screen, to have this sense of talking directly to the senator who is remote. We built this bunker. We call this a bunker, and that could be used in a situation of war, for example. And the speaker of the Senate, he sees all the other senators at the same time, and he can make a little bit like a session. It's not a maybe it's not a perfect session, sure, but we could have this structure that could be moved to another place in case of attack, for example, to the building of our Congress. So I guess we have, yes, we have some legacy from the pandemics that we should try to find a way to use this at the better way for the benefit of democracy, of Parliament. And I'm still worried about remote voting. I guess filibustering should be a right of the opposition, but I guess that the remote session, the possibility to allow participation of a congressman that cannot be physically in the building is something that should be maintained for the better of democracy. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bandeira, for sharing that with us. Congressman Brian Baird, would you like to close this round, and so we can move to the end of our discussion here today?
Yeah, I would just add one other thing that I think is really important. As we try to adapt rules to the technology and vice versa, the degree to which we can help maintain something like the interpersonal interactions is hugely important. I'll give you one example. In our Congress, in the House, when we come in to vote, there's a large board that shows who has voted yay, nay, or present. And it has happened that I've walked in pretty sure I knew how I wanted to vote. And I've looked on the screen and people I respect and trust and admire have gone the other way. And I've said to myself, maybe I'm missing something. And I've gone across the floor, sat down with my colleagues in real time and said, we're voting different. Help me understand your vote. And they've talked to me, and sometimes they've persuaded me that they had information or insights that I hadn't considered, and I've actually changed my vote. That ability to have one-on-one conversations, or maybe there's in a hearing, the other side saying something, I'm saying something, and I realize, you know what? If we could just step off to the side, talk together, person to person, colleague to colleague, we could work this out. We've worked it out. We've gone back to our chairs and say, after conversation with the gentlelady from so-and-so, I've decided to drop my amendment or accept her friendly amendment. Finding ways to keep that interpersonal tie through the technology will be really, really important to maintaining the effectiveness and the collegiality of the institution.
Thank you, Congressman Brian Baird. Thank you, Bandeira. Thank you, Juan, Dios, for this outstanding panel. It was a pleasure to be your moderator today.